CRT is racist, it is abusive, it discriminates against one's color.
They are inserting an issue that does not even exist. It's not in our curriculum, and it's not in our lesson plans, and it shouldn't even be in our conversations.
I'm a white woman with children in Stafford schools. I want them to learn about our history, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
My children have to think that they're guilty of some crime that they haven't committed because of the color of their skin. I mean, I can't believe we're having this conversation.
This is a Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall. Crisis in the Classroom.
Educational injustice inevitably leads to racial injustice. Education is the foundation of a prosperous society. It cultivates the leaders, entrepreneurs, and humanitarians who will transform the world. Ben Crump, a renowned civil rights attorney, has joined a lawsuit against the Baltimore City School District. The case will reveal the inner workings of school administrations like the one in Kalamazoo, Michigan, which have denied so many students the right to an adequate education. When Black children are denied a decent education while their white counterparts are not, it causes strife between the races and conflict within Black communities. New research shows racial disparities are growing in Michigan's teacher workforce as the number of Black teachers in classrooms shrinks. Laura Painter finds out what this means for teacher recruitment and how it could impact your child's education.
New research by Michigan State University finds the number of K-12 Black teachers in Michigan decreased by 48% from 2005 to 2015. Educators tell me that's a big problem. They say if Black students don't see themselves in their teachers, they might not want to become teachers. I talked one-on-one with Kalamazoo Central High School chemistry teacher Jovan Carver, who hopes to be the positive role model he says was hard to find.
I tell people all the time that I didn't become a teacher to teach chemistry. I came here to inspire people on a daily basis.
Jovan Carver is living proof hard work pays off.
When I grew up, I had maybe one African-American teacher. Outside of school, I never got a chance to see an African-American male in a positive light.
Carver's a Lloyd Norrix High School grad who received 100% of the Kalamazoo Promise Scholarship. He graduated from Western Michigan University thanks to a stipend and 100% tuition scholarships designed for minorities who want to be teachers.
I just try to use everyday interaction to pick the kids' brains about what their passions are.
Research across the country shows the teacher shortage is real, large, and growing. Recruiting new teachers is hard across the board, but experts say race can add more challenges.
You particularly think that anything that's troubling or difficult for any teacher, when you add race on top of it and all the issues that are going on in our country and trying to best support children of color, the teachers of color experience that like 10 times as much. And so that's a very stressful situation, and it's a burnout situation.
That's where Nelson says specific scholarships or professional support at colleges and school districts can help.
How do we in the teacher education program acknowledge that the student is coming in, they may need supports in different ways, may not, let's not make the assumption, but if that is a pattern that we're seeing, how does the teacher education program then adapt to provide that extra support?
For teachers like Carver, that support has made all the difference.
With the promise, I think that for me, I wouldn't be able to go to college. I wouldn't be able to be a part of this career that I have now without that scholarship and that blessing.
The majority of Kalamazoo public school students, nearly 40%, are Black. According to the district, only 13% of teachers are Black. Without enough representation in classrooms, Carver says Black students may struggle to connect with their teachers, which is what he hopes to inspire some of his students to become. Nelson also says exposing people early in life to teaching can help with recruitment. Many districts are starting with some middle school clubs, and there are high school opportunities through career and technical education. Nelson says programs like these start to build a relationship with the field of teaching that gets younger students excited, and they're more likely to follow through and pursue teaching as a career option.
Thank you, Laura. Famed civil rights attorney Ben Crump joined a lawsuit against the city of Baltimore, calling it the next big civil rights case, our children's education. Chris Papps from Project Baltimore has the story.
our children are the solution that's going to impact this world.
Ben Crump is known nationally as a high-profile civil rights attorney, representing the families of Trayvon Martin, George Floyd, and Breonna Taylor.
We have to start putting our children first.
Now, Baltimore is where he believes the next civil rights battle will be fought.
It's not enough for me simply to fight for our children's lives when they are killed by biased policing and unjust police shootings to the back. But it's just as horrific when you think about our children being killed softly, slowly, every day in an unsympathetic, uncaring school system that believes in just passing them along to get along.
Crump is joining a lawsuit filed in January, representing the plaintiffs Giovanni and Shonda Patterson, two Baltimore City parents. The complaint accuses the school system of failing to educate generations of students.
Do you believe the civil rights of the students in Baltimore City, as far as education is concerned, are being violated?
I think it's even more than a civil rights issue. It's a human rights issue.
But civil rights lawsuits concerning education are historically unsuccessful in court. This lawsuit is taking a different approach, asserting the rights of taxpayers, claiming they've been forced to fund a school system that's wasted their tax dollars and engaged in possible fraudulent activity. The complaint filed in Baltimore City Circuit Court cites several Project Baltimore investigations exposing poor test scores, grade changing, students promoted without completing coursework, and inflating enrollment numbers.
When you cannot read and write, you don't have literacy, you don't have education, you're already in prison. They just haven't shut the prison door gate. And that's what we're fighting against.
Baltimore City has recorded more than 300 murders each year for the past 7 years. Crump says without improving public education, the city may never escape this cycle. He recalls his own childhood and the importance education played.
I think about my mother, who taught me life isn't fair. She said life is hard. You make it fair by what you bring to the table. And if you don't bring anything to the table, don't expect anybody to let you sit down at the table. But she told me education, baby, is something to bring to the table.
The lawsuit, if successful, would allow a judge to intervene on behalf of taxpayers and order the public school system to make changes. Crump says the implications could be far-reaching.
I think this is far bigger than Baltimore. I think what we're dealing with is an education crisis that is national. Baltimore can be the example for cities all across America if we can get it right here. And it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. It may be multifaceted, but we at least have to have the courage to come to the table and try to fight for the solutions.
I'm Chris Pabst, and this is Project Baltimore.
Recently, before coming to Kalamazoo, I had a chance to sit down with attorney Ben Crump. He tells us education is a human right. An extraordinary coming together of unlikely allies. You were in Baltimore, Maryland recently at the courthouse where you joined Giovanni and Shonda Patterson's lawsuit as co-counsel, challenging the Baltimore City school system to do better in educating their children. Why?
You know, Armstrong, we've been following this issue for quite a while since the Pattersons approached me. I've followed your news reports on schools in crisis, but most importantly, a lot of parents and former teachers have talked with me about, these critical issues that they think are killing our children slowly every day by denying them a quality education, denying them literacy, denying them the ability to read and write. educational injustice ultimately leads to racial injustice in the sense that it has Black and brown children on the fast track for the school to prison pipeline. And that's what we're fighting. You know, nobody could argue if you don't have the ability to read and write, if you don't have the education or literacy, it's like you're already in prison in American society today. They just haven't slammed the prison cell door on you. And so we are fighting. The reason I joined this lawsuit is to fight for our children to have an equal opportunity at having life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, those fundamental American aspirations and promises that we want to give all of our children. Black and brown children shouldn't be denied that because the school systems failed them.
You know, your wife is a former teacher. She's PhD now. You have a daughter who's very bright, does very well in school, both parents involved in her education. Could you imagine your child being in a system where the average GPA is 1.0 for the entire school district, barely able to read? I mean, as a parent, there's a role that you must also play in this education experience.
You know, as a parent, we intentionally have our daughter in the public school system because we believe that we can't give up on the public school systems. We have to fight for our children, those who most desperately need a good education, the ones that are growing up in the inner cities and the statistics are all against them. For me, I was one of those children, and it was education that led me to where I am today. As Malcolm X said, education is the passport to the future. And without education, it is stealing our children's future. And I'll say this, Armstrong Williams, it really isn't just about my child. As I've said often, whether we're fighting for Trayvon Martin or Breonna Taylor, it's about all our children. It's about all our children having an opportunity to live out the fulfillment of destiny that God has for them without their life being snubbed out. Well, the same way a senseless act of brutality with a police bullet killing our children, it is just as horrific for our children to be killed softly and subtly every day by uncaring, unsympathetic school system that has said, we rather just go along to get along. We don't care if you can read or write when you graduate. That is a slow death.
Was this your reference during the press conference? A death by 1,000 cuts?
Absolutely. I mean, it literally, when you count up the number of school days in a year, and you multiply that by 12 years, and if a child graduates and can barely read on a elementary school level, if that, how can you say it's anything but death by 1,000 cuts?
You know, you've given so many parents and their children hope, but is this systemic?
I think it's systemic, not just in Baltimore. I think this is systemic, not just in Baltimore, but it's systemic in cities all across America, whether Rochester, whether, Detroit, whether Los Angeles. The school systems are failing our children. It's not our children failing, it's the school systems. This lawsuit is not about teachers' performance. It's about the system holding them back from being able to do their job. These teachers are dedicated and passionate, and they want to make a difference in the lives of children. But when they're told they have to change grades, that's not what these teachers went to college to do. That's not why they went into the teaching profession. They went into the teaching profession to challenge themselves to be able to educate the next generation of children. And many of them have said the system is an impediment to them being able to achieve that objective. So what we have to do is say to the system, if we continue to do things the way we are doing them and expect different results, it is the definition for insanity. And what message are we really sending our children?
So obviously there has been a triumph, much praise from around the country for you sort of stepping out of the box to join the Baltimore City Law School. And while this lawsuit is unusual, you're not seeking money. You're seeking to make sure that you believe that these children are entitled to literacy. You're involved in something very similar in Detroit school system. But for those that are wondering, how did you arrive at finally making a conscious decision against all the criticism, going against people who you see as mentors, as friends, and some people even say betraying your own community? This was not an easy decision for you.
Now, it's not an easy decision because many of these school districts were being led by minorities. And so we are normally allies in many ways on many issues. And it is my sincere hope that we can be allies here. I understand as a lawyer, especially as a civil rights trial lawyer, that courts traditionally in America have been the apparatus to push forward progress. And so we're turning to the courts again with this novel lawsuit based on the taxpayers having a right to not have to pay taxes for a system that is not doing what it is supposed to do. It is going to be landmark here in Baltimore, this lawsuit. And if we're successful here in Baltimore, then we can use it as a model for cities all across America. And that's how I arrived at this decision to say that, you know, even when it's unpopular, we always have to do the right thing. And I believe fighting for our children is the right thing. And hopefully the people who don't understand how I arrived at this decision will search in their heart and put politics aside and put our children first.
State lawmakers around the country are taking steps to prevent schools from teaching younger kids about gender identity and sexual orientation. Coming up next, we look at one bill making its way through the legislature in Pennsylvania. And we welcome you back to Crisis in the Classroom. Parents are taking control of their children's education in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Senate Bill 1278 passed and no moves to the House to prevent gender identity and sexual orientation being taught from pre-K to 5th grade. Our Samantha York from sister station WHP has the information.
It's a crisis in the classroom. The Fairness in Women's Sports Act passing the House 30-20, now making its way to the governor's desk. In a separate bill, Senator Ryan Ahman sponsoring the Empowering Families and Education Act with Senator Scott Martin to prevent young students from being taught about gender identity and sexual orientation. CBS 21 Samantha York now live with more on the bill and the community reaction.
Well, Jasmine, this bill just passed the Senate in a 29-21 vote, and now it heads to the House of Representatives.
Families are very concerned.
Senate Bill 1278 seeks to keep gender identity and sexual orientation from being taught in pre-K through 5th grade classrooms.
It's an issue where you have some educators who are initiating these conversations without families being made aware.
Whether it's something that needs to be legislated, no, I disagree with that.
This is legislation that isn't compassionate, that is looking to exploit fears in people that have been stirred up in the last couple of years.
Under the Empowering Families and Education Act, students could be introduced to the subjects in 6th grade when sex ed enters the curriculum through health state standards.
Doesn't prevent any organic conversations that may be brought up by a student in a classroom, but does say that it ought not be teacher initiated. It should be family initiated at those early grade levels.
Teachers shouldn't talk about gayness. I don't think they should. That's the parents' responsibility to talk about sex education education to their children. It's not the school's responsibility.
Sexual orientation is not about sex.
Those opposed to the bill call it controversial.
Say you're a child from a same-sex family. You're going to feel lesser than the other people that this is being targeted against your family.
That's the way they want to live. That's their life.
It gets caught up as being an anti-LGBTQ piece of legislation, don't say gay. That couldn't be further from the truth.
Those in favor of the bill call it common sense.
Parents are the ones to initiate sensitive conversations around sexual orientation, gender identity.
I think a lot of kids are going to be awkward about it, and they're going to be mixed up. They don't need to be talked about yet.
Young people, in an appropriate way, ought to be informed about what the fabric of their community looks like, because they're going to see it every day.
Now, this bill was packaged with Senate Bill 1277, and that bill seeks to keep books that are deemed explicit out of schools. That bill also passed in a 30-20 vote and also heads to the House of Representatives. Reporting live, I'm Samantha York, CBS 21 News.
Joining me now is Taylor Leanne Chandler, president of Flux and Healthcare Foundation. Taylor, welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you for having me.
Why is there such a push, not by all in the transgender community, but a very small few, this talk about gender identity and sexuality with young kids in school?
I think it's a misnomer. I don't think that anybody's trying to teach kids to be any certain way. I think it's more about affirming either their identity, a family member's identity, or a parent's, and it being a safe space to do so.
Why do you need to affirm someone's identity? Shouldn't you should be secure with your own?
Well, yeah, but we're talking about children in this sense. So you want to make sure that it's affirming in the sense to just so that they can grow and be nurtured. But at the same time, what if they're not trans? They feel that way then. So you want to affirm that, but maybe they'll grow out of it. Maybe they won't. It's just a safe space to allow children to be themselves and how they feel.
Do you actually
without
think
making
parents
them feel bad?
Do you actually think parents, when they're dealing with their children at the tender age of 4, 5, and 3 years old, with all the pressure with COVID and educating their kids and the adjustments, are actually thinking about whether their kids are trans or not? You think they're actually thinking about their sexuality?
I don't think they are, but I feel like if a kid is showing that or demonstrating things that lead to that, I'm sure a parent is very aware at that point.
Then why is the transgender community more obsessed with young kids' education than the parents and the family members?
Because just like everything else is taught in school, some version of this, very brief depending on the age or more in-depth as they get older, is just as important. Think about how isolating it would be if a child was in school and they were not allowed to talk about their parent, or if they talked about their parent who was trans, they would be reprimanded and told that they can't talk about that at school. How would that make a child feel?
Have you seen the academic performance for kids all across America and the dismal results, how they're failing in math, English, history, and science, which is a barometer of them becoming contributing citizens to our society? Shouldn't that be the overarching focus of a kid's experience in the classroom?
Yes, but if they don't have their mental health and they feel like they're isolated, they will not be open to learning. Just like as adults, if our mental health isn't in sync, we don't function properly. We don't work properly. We're not at our best. So it's the same for a kid.
Mentally, logically, and reasoning, a person is not fully developed until they're at the age of 27 years old. 27,
exactly.
Man, you're talking about 4 and 5 year old babies.
I knew who I was at 3 years old. They lined us up at daycare and they told me They said, girls line up over here, boys line up over here. I instantly got in the girls' line, and that was the first time I was made aware that something wasn't quite right with me. So I certainly knew who I was. I never said I wanted to be a girl. I just knew I was one.
And what percentage would you say you are of the population that experienced that?
That's hard to say because there's not really concrete data anywhere as to that type of determination. There needs to be more in-depth assessments for sure. But regardless of the age that a child shows that or demonstrates that is irrelevant. It's like when it happens, that's when we deal with it. It's not like we're making it happen, which is, I think, what a lot of people are implying.
Well, I think whether you're making it happen or not, parents just don't want it overwhelmingly. They want to be the influencers and the caretakers of their children. They don't want their children indoctrinated with this identity and this being over sexualized. They just want them to be babies, want them to be children. What's wrong with that?
Nothing's wrong with that. But at the same time, it's not about indoctrinating anybody. Someone that's not trans isn't going to become trans because of something they heard in school. It's just not the way it works.
But should sexuality and gender be taught in school to pre-K students? That's the real issue, should it?
I don't know about sexuality, but gender, yes.
Why?
Because it's one of the first things we learn about is boys and girls, pets, the gender of your family members. So there's nothing wrong with talking about all genders, not just binary male and female.
We learn that because when we look sometimes at our birth certificates, it clearly defines whether you're male or female. Enough said.
Not really, because, the brain differentiates in the first trimester before sexual organ development continues and happens. So in the beginning, we're all female. So what happens if the brain differentiates one way, but the body keeps going? There's where you have the issue. And it's nobody's fault. And it shouldn't be looked upon as something that's bad or needs to be fixed per se. It just needs to be affirmed. If someone's diagnosed with or has a cleft palate or a club foot, we don't tell them, oh, that's just the way it is. We don't talk about that. You just live your life. No, we get it fixed. We make sure that we affirm them and love them. It's
I
the
think
same.
the good news that you and I both will agree on, and I thank you for joining us, is that it's a decision for the parents and no one else. They should be the arbiter of their children.
I think that's the child's
think most
decision
parents will
who they
agree
are.
that is a decision for the parents. But thank you, always a pleasure to see you, and thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
During the COVID-19 pandemic, parents got more involved than ever in the education of their children and in the ways their school district operates. We'll speak with someone who has done some extensive reporting on this issue when we come back. And welcome back. I'm Armstrong Williams, and thank you for staying with Crisis in the Classroom. Soon we talk with JT Fetch from our Albany, New York newsroom, WRGB. Listen to what parents are saying in Albany.
We're going to be discussing, puberty blockers today. If you would like your child to not see this information, then XYZ, nothing. So we were shocked when we found out that this was being presented to them.
Let's see. Wait a second. What gender are you? A person who is transgender is someone whose internal sense of their gender, being a boy, girl, or something else, doesn't match their physical body. People who feel this way sometimes feel anxious when they begin to reach puberty and their body starts to change in ways that don't match their internal sense of their gender. These feelings are totally normal.
Without our knowledge, and the fact that it was medical information that was being relayed to them with no physician, no doctor present, And these are prescription drugs that are life-altering. Again, 12 and 13-year-old kids. So we felt that it was inappropriate.
As promised, joining us now is WRGB's JT Fetch. Thank you for the excellent reporting. You know, it's interesting, this video that was shown to Shaker Middle School students about puberty, and parents were not involved, and some parents were just shocked.
Yeah, no, first of all, thanks for having us on, and I appreciate the feedback. You know, that's the thing that really struck me, was when you hear from that parent and that you hear that her young child in 7th grade is confused by this. You know, and I think back to, you know, when I was in school, and just that feeling of being confused about anything, whether it was in math class, or usually it was in math class when I was confused, or science class, and just that feeling of confusion, and you feel like you've done something wrong. You know, when you come home and you say, hey, Mom, you know, this is what they talked about today in school. This is what they showed us, and I didn't understand it. And then, you know, the fact that, again, it was medical information, I think, you know, these parents were concerned about that.
Talking to kids about a transgender kid going through puberty. I mean, that would shock, I guess, any parent, JT.
Yeah, well, and especially, too, I think what we've been hearing a lot, and it seems to be happening here in New York State, happens a lot in 7th grade, where this topic really starts to get tackled. And this is, the school district will tell you that this is because of the state rules on this and the state guidelines, and that it starts in 7th grade. But the fact that these parents are not getting a heads up is what's really concerning them, that this is maybe a conversation that they wanted to have, certainly not in the classroom with their child, but in the home. They wanted to be the ones leading it, and they didn't want to be doing it in 7th grade. A lot of people think it's too much, too young.
But JT, I think the real issue here is this. It is a red flag when you expose a 7th grader to this, not asking for the parents' permission. It tells the parents, firstly, you're trying to indoctrinate their child. Secondly, you don't want their permission to do so. And there is something that's very wrong with it, because if it were not, why would you hide it and not get the parents involved?
Well, certainly great points there, and I think that's what a lot of parents are concerned about. And I think the interesting thing is that you're seeing a lot of these parents, and we've been seeing this across the country, from Loudoun County out to San Francisco, where parents are fed up with the decisions that are being made. You know, certainly it appears that these decisions are being made behind their backs. It's certainly being made without their input, without them being asked ahead of time, and they've had enough of this. And our tip line got, you know, calls and emails from several of these parents from the same school district, all saying the same thing. I wasn't given a heads up about this. I'm sick and tired of this, and I want to know what my kid is learning. And parents feel that they have the right to know what they're being taught, what their child's being taught, despite what some education leaders and some politicians would say otherwise.
But to talk about prescribing medications for puberty blockers, are you serious?
Well, and yeah, well, that's you know, the other interesting thing here, interesting to say the least, is that with it being medical information and the mention of an endocrinologist, you know, talk about being confused. I think I maybe found out what an endocrinologist was, you know, 7 years ago, let alone not in 7th grade. I didn't know what an endocrinologist was. So to have that being brought up, you know, and in the format that it was brought up, in a YouTube video, in a cartoon, in a kid-friendly way, and you know, it just gets right into it. It's less than 2 minutes, I believe, the length of the video, but it gets right into, oh, you know, it's basically like an ad for adults. Talk to your doctor, right, about this. Ask this question. Here's an endocrinologist. They could prescribe this. And it was pretty surprising to see that kind of real blatant medical information go right to children in the classroom.
JT Fetch from our own WRGB in Albany, New York. Thank you so much for your outstanding reporting.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the feedback, and thanks again for having us.
And joining us now is Dina Bass-Williams, partner, Bass Public Affairs. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You know, are we not imposing an ideology on children that is sort of outside the dominant social norm in this country when we tried to indoctrinate them with this transgender education and over-sexualizing them, especially, Dina, we're talking about babies 4, 5, 6 years old.
Armstrong, you are 100% correct. We are outside of the norm, but my fear is that if people of common sense don't speak out, this will become the norm. And so, you know, I'm here because I'm a professional aunt. I'm not a parent, but what I do see with my sister, who you have on the show often, parents who are very adamant about having control over what their children learn. That is what we're seeing. And we're seeing it's outside of the bounds of politics as well. It's not just the left, it's not the right. There are parents from the far left and the far right who are coming together to say, this is ridiculous. I have a voice, and I don't want my young children, my middle school children, my high school children being indoctrinated in this way. And so we're excited to see, you know, we are clearly in our public affairs firm, we are a right of center public affairs firm, but we're working with people who are far left, lesbian feminists who want to make sure that we are not over-sexualizing children in this way, who also see this as outrageous. And that's the thing. This is an awakening of parents who want to have control over what their children are learning.
But isn't this exacerbating the identity crisis and putting undue pressure on these children?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, you know, my sister Dee Dee, who is usually the one talking about these issues as relates to parents, she often says that when she was a little girl, she wanted to be a butterfly. And so when you're at that age, when you're a little bitty, tiny tot, you want to be so many different things. You want to be an astronaut. You want to be a butterfly. You want to, but so as kids at this very impressionable age want to be things that they can't be, like butterflies, we're telling little boys that they in fact can be girls. And as politically incorrect as it is for me to say this, little boys can't be little girls, and we will lose clients for that. Corporations will shun us for that. But the truth, like, we can't deny the science. Little boys cannot be little girls. Now, little boys can wear pink, and little boys can play with dolls, and little boys can do all those things. But what is happening now is that we're trying to rewrite science, and it's not a religious point of view. It's very secular. You cannot rewrite science, and this move to do that is denying the science that little boys can't be little girls.
In the minute that we have left, why the babies?
You know, I think that if it is very clear throughout history, over the spans of time, we have seen if you can get the children, if you can grab the children, if you can indoctrinate the children, you change the world. And so that is why they are attacking our children. And that's why people from the far left and the far right are uniting on this and saying no more. I would encourage your viewers to go to womensbillofrights.com. And one thing we need to do is the foundational definition of what a woman is. We need to protect that. And there's a Women's Bill of Rights that is being supported by women from the left and from the right, because we have to codify the basic word, what a woman is.
Dina,
and
listen, it is always a pleasure to have your strong voice. Thank you so much for joining us on this edition of Crisis in the Classroom.
Thank you.
School boards are also taking action on what kids learn in class and how their districts conduct their daily business. Coming up, we'll tell you what steps one community in Ohio is taking and hear from both sides of the decision. Welcome back to Your Voice, Your Future, Crisis in the Classroom. I'm Armstrong Williams. Parents are stepping up to change woke culture teaching in Cincinnati. WKRC's Brad Underwood has more.
issue, and the majority of them disagreeing with the majority of the school board that voted to pass that resolution. Here is the full name of it. They wanting the resolution to create a culture of kindness and equal opportunity for all students and staff. Now, this resolution says that the district declares an official opposition to the use of race-based or identity-based training, curriculum, methodology in public education. We'll show you what it looked like inside here this evening. With the passage of this resolution, it means the district will not utilize critical race theory, intersectionality, identity, or any anti-racism curriculum for student education or any staff training. It also creates a number of rules that schools may not use class, religion, gender identity, sex, ethnicity, or culture as consideration when hiring or even administrating programs or evaluation systems. And it even goes on to say that schools cannot force individuals to admit privilege or oppression or to reflect or deconstruct or confront identities based on race, class, religion, gender identity, sexual preference, ethnicity, or culture. It runs the gamut, and we have the full list at local12.com here. Public comment, again, very passionate, as you had most of the people, parents, residents here in the district disagreeing with the majority of the school board. 23 people speaking tonight, only one in support of the resolution.
It's the right thing to do. Children and staff should never be divided into arbitrary groups, with some pitied as oppressed, while others are blamed as oppressors, something that Forest Hills School District has clearly done.
It states that there is to be an avoidance of controversial issues where any more than one solution is being supported.
Forest Hills will not utilize anti-racism curriculum. What is the opposite of anti-racism curriculum? Racism curriculum.
Here's some things a teacher couldn't say to a student under this resolution. They couldn't say, before you judge someone, walk a mile in their shoes. They couldn't say, remember that some people have it harder than you. Those are appeals to consider or confront issues of class, privilege, culture, race, religion, and other things. Outlawing those kind of comments is not creating a culture of kindness. It's the opposite.
And while you heard there some outbursts of laughter as people read parts of this resolution during the public comment, the majority of them got up immediately, booing, yelling, shouting even some profanities at the board members after that 3-2 vote, and they left. Now, this resolution comes less than a month after the school board here in the district canceling Diversity Day at Turpin High School. Now, Dr. Leslie Rasmussen brought that up today, reinstating a motion to bring back Diversity Day next year for not only Turpin, but also Anderson, putting it on the calendars. It was also voted down 3-2.
Joining us now is Robert Hillard Petillo, II, civil rights attorney. I always welcome your voice to this discussion. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Why does this critical race theory debate continue to rage and divide? And what is the happy medium for everyone, Robert?
Well, it's interesting because it seems that people on the far fringes of American politics think of a new thing to divide education every couple of years. This time it's critical race theory. A few years ago, it's Common Core was the big boogeyman. I remember when I was a kid, it was prayer in school and corporal punishment was the big thing that the political right was saying was going to be destroying our educational system. I think the big problem is that we do not want to do systemic and holistic educational reform in this country. We're one of the few industrialized countries where you can graduate with a secondary education and you don't know how to drive a car, you don't know how to buy a car, you don't know how to file your taxes, you don't know how to apply for a mortgage or any life skills at all. And because of this, we end up arguing around the fringes instead of attacking the actual needs, which is the wholesale redevelopment of our and redeployment of our educational opportunities. Right now, fundamentally, school acts as a babysitter for kids as opposed to actually educating them into the 21st century economy. And we're not ready as a country to have that conversation. So it's easier to argue about the culture war issues than about fixing the educational system from the bottom up. On the one side, you have teachers unions who have been recalcitrant to change. And on the other side, you have people who simply want to destroy the public school system and move to a privatized model. And we have not been able to find a happy median. So we just kind of dither around the edges.
Why is it that you feel there's not an emphasis, particularly in high schools, on financial literacy?
We have a very archaic American educational system. We refuse to use models that we've seen from around the world. You know, it's wonderful to grow up and know Shakespeare if you plan on growing up to be a theater major. However, I think for other people, it may be a better idea to teach them how to file taxes, or teach them how to get a small business loan, or how to finance a car. Many people, they do not grow up in families that can show them those sorts of things. They're deep into their 30s and 40s and have already ruined themselves financially before they figure out how the system works. So I think because the American political apparatus is unable to have these conversations, and we put such a focus on standardized tests in the last 20 years or so, we've come to a point where our educational system no longer keeps pace with the rest of the world.
You know, what is fascinating about this discussion, we're focused on an issue about the kind of education and what is going to be taught. But there was a recent story out of Baltimore where a squeegee kid shot and killed someone. The guy got out of his vehicle with a bat, and there was an interview on the Fox Baltimore station where they interviewed one of these kids, and he dropped out of school in the 9th grade. He said the school wasn't teaching him anything. And if you dig deeper, what you realize, a lot of these kids are victims of the school system, whether they're ghost kids, whether they just don't show up, whether they're just passed on with inflated grades. And what happens, Robert, is when they graduate, they really don't have real skills to take the jobs that are available to them. So they become squeegee kids. They get involved in sexual trafficking. They get involved in prostitution because the school system has failed them.
You're absolutely correct. And Angela Davis spoke about this probably 30 years ago. She called it the alternative economy, which is when you deprive people of the skills needed to participate in the current economy, they have to enter the alternative economy, as you mentioned, which is drugs, which is gang violence, which is prostitution, which is all these other parts of the economy, because fundamentally those have replaced the manual labor jobs that once existed. Our schools need to be teach our kids how to program the robots that are now doing those manual labor jobs, how to be software engineers, and even in lieu of that, how to work on the robots that are going to be driving our trucks and driving our economy in the next 20 to 30 years. But because these children do not see the value in what they're learning, because if you are let's say a poor kid in Baltimore who comes from a disadvantaged background, maybe trigonometry is a good thing to know, but that's not something that's going to put food on your table in the here and now. So we do need to put a more focus on vocational education in this country. We do need to put more focus on getting we have a truck driver shortage in America right now that's crippling our economy. Let's get some of these kids these tools and skills needed to get their CDL. We are having a shortage of dock workers in this country. Let's make sure these kids have the skills and the knowledge needed to work some of this heavy machinery. So you have the people, you have the need, but what we are lacking is the institutional ability to change our educational apparatus, because schools have to teach towards the test instead of towards what the curriculum that is needed to advance the children going forward.
Finally, why do you think that these brown and black kids are disproportionately the hardest hit by the failed education of cities, particularly all across the United States? Why?
Well, it's interesting because I'm originally from, red state America, flyover country. I'm from Waverly Hall, Georgia. And if you look at the numbers in rural America, if you look at the trailer park, for example, where I grew up down in Harris County, you'll see very similar social economic problems and very similar educational problems that exist. Fundamentally speaking, education has become a province of the rich. If you have enough money to get your children after school tutoring, if you have enough money to put them into a private or parochial school, they have a much better life outcome than simply depending on the public education system, which has been underfunded and under-regulated for decades now. We have to have the type of governmental leadership put us in a position where parents can have input, and also business and community leaders can have input on what are the jobs that we need to be training for 10 and 20 years down the road. We don't need to be teaching a 16-year-old right now how to get a job in 1980. We need to be teaching them how to get a job in 2030. And fundamentally, our educational system is ill-equipped to do so, and we're not willing as a society to have those real arguments about that. And this is why, as you said, we're having arguments about critical race theory, drag queens in school, schools, transgender bathrooms, all this crap that means nothing, instead of focusing on the fact that we are sending kids to school from the ages of 5 years old till 18, and they're coming out without the skills needed to survive in American society.
Robert Patillo, always appreciate your clear insights. School officials have enriched themselves at the cost of tens of thousands of children across our country. Educational system corruption is one of the most heinous kinds of corruption. Mere accidental missteps can jeopardize the future of a child, but related acts of malice, as is occurring across the country, can devastate the lives of thousands of children. Now is the time to fight back and reclaim our children's future. Thank you so much for joining us for this edition of Crisis in the Classroom.